I find myself constantly amazed by the power of trans. They can unlock a video for someone who can't hear, offering access to stories and informations that would otherwise be unavailable. It's a simple thing, text on a screen, but it can open up entire worlds. Today, I want to share a story that chilled me to the bone when I first read about it. It happened on a palm tree farm in Indonesia. A quiet morning, heavy with humidity after a night of rain, that would soon turn into a nightmare. I still think about Reggie sometimes, about how one moment he was alive, walking near a water channel on a farm, and the next he was gone, swallowed whole by a python. They found him curled up inside the snake, covered in slime, his clothes torn. The workers had noticed a strange bulge in the snake, something too large to be a pig or a dog. It took several men with knives and poles to finally kill the python. Cutting it open must have been a terrible task. Reggie's notebook and phone were found nearby, damaged and muddy. That was in 2014. Around the same time, on March 15th, in Ranthambore National Park in Rajasthan, India, two travellers were sleeping in a tent, unaware that a snake had silently slithered inside. Clare Johnson, a 26-year-old graphic designer from Melbourne, Australia, had been saving for 2 years for a year-long trip around Asia. She was known for her sense of adventure, but also for her careful planning. Visiting Ranthambore was a dream for her. She longed to photograph wild tigers. She'd even seen one earlier that day. She was sharing a basic tent with Lara, a German student she'd met on the train. Claire was meticulous about keeping the tent organized, always shaking out her shoes and ensuring the entrance was zipped up tight. That evening, because it was cool, she'd zipped the canvas door completely shut, leaving only a small opening for fresh air. The eco-camp was next to dry grassland, perfect habitat for reptiles that hunted in the cool night air. Spectacled cobras were common in that region. These snakes usually avoid people, but they sometimes wander into human areas in search of food or warmth. They can grow up to 6 feet long, and their venom is potent enough to kill a person within hours without treatment. Local guides always warned campers to check their bedding. Sometime after school and the vetting, Lara woke to a soft rustling near the bottom of the tent. Half asleep, she grabbed her phone and switched on the flashlight. The beam revealed a spectacled cobra coiled just inches from Claire's sleeping bag, its head raised slightly. Before Lara could react, Claire moved in her sleep, and her bare ankle brushed against the snake. The cobra struck twice, its fangs sinking into her skin. Lara screamed, waking everyone in the camp. Claire sat up, clutching her ankle, where 2 small puncture wounds marked the snake's bite. Camp workers rushed to the tent with flashlights, spotting the snake as it disappeared outside. Claire's breathing became rapid and shallow, and her eyes seemed glazed. When she tried to stand, her legs buckled beneath her. She said her legs felt like jelly before collapsing back onto her mat. The camp had no anti-venom. They put Claire in a jeep and raced towards the nearest hospital, Lara pressing a scarf above the bites, trying to slow the spread of the poison. The journey took over 40 minutes on rough roads. Halfway there, Claire stopped responding. Her skin turned pale, cold, and clammy. When they finally reached the rural clinic, the medical staff told them there was nothing they could do. I've spent years studying how easily a moment of carelessness can turn into tragedy, particularly when we venture into the natural world. A young German backpacker named Lara learned this lesson in the most brutal way imaginable. She had been staying at a campsite in Australia, drawn by the allure of sleeping under the stars. But one night she was bitten by a deadly snake hiding in her tent, a nightmare that ended her life far too soon. Later that day, Lara's parents were contacted through the Australian Embassy, and they requested that her body be cremated following local customs. The camp management, understandably shaken, decided not to close down their business. Instead, they hired a local snake expert who began giving weekly talks to new guests. These talks were practical, teaching people how to thoroughly check their tents and why it was important to keep lights on at night to deter snakes. Lara eventually returned to Germany, and later she shared her story on a travel website. It was a detailed account, a stark warning to other backpackers about the importance of checking tents, bedding, and shoes when staying in areas where snakes might be present. The post circulated quietly for years, a grim reminder to travelers who romanticized sleeping close to nature without fully grasping the real dangers. This incident underscores how vital it is for travelers to take safety precautions seriously when venturing into wilderness areas. Even experienced and careful travelers can face unexpected dangers when wild animals and humans share the same spaces. This tragedy serves as a reminder that proper preparation and awareness can be life-saving when traveling in remote natural areas. Then there's the story of Jorge Cruz, a 42-year-old man who worked in a lime orchard outside a rural town near Veracruz, Mexico. It was September 9th, 2015. He had worked in that orchard his whole life, rising before sunrise each day to tend to the trees and teach his oldest son the nuances of healthy fruit. The villagers knew Jorge as a dependable man, someone who would readily help his neighbors without expecting anything in return. Jorge had a childhood habit. He preferred to work without shoes. He believed it helped him feel the ground better and move faster when climbing the lower tree branches. The afternoon was intensely hot, the air thick and still. The sun beat down relentlessly on the leaves. The orchard had been in his family for generations, but on this particular day, the normal routine would be shattered. Jorge was working with two neighbors, Raul and Mateo. They were picking limes on the far side of the grove, near a pile of cut tree branches left after a recent clearing. The three men joked about the heat as they moved among the low branches, filling bags with limes. Jorge, wearing his wide hat pushed back on his head and an old faded shirt, reached for a low branch, shifting his weight to pull the fruit closer. The ground was hard dirt, covered with cut leaves and thin roots. The pile of cut branches offered cool shade for mice, rats, and small reptiles. A patch of wild plants marked the edge of the orchard, and the low treetops cast long, shifting shadows across the ground. It was quiet, so small sounds, of falling fruit, clothes brushing against bark, were easily heard. The men were focused on their work and conversation, perhaps not as attentive to the potential dangers around them as they should have been. A type of poisonous snake called the terciopelo, Bothrops asper, known locally as the naka, lives in Central America. These snakes are thick-bodied, typically growing to be 3 to 5 feet long. They possess a potent venom that destroys skin and muscle, causes severe bleeding at the site of the bite, and can disrupt blood clotting and blood press throughout the body. They blend seamlessly with fallen leaves, often remaining motionless until someone is nearly upon them. Their bite is excruciating, and the affected area swells rapidly. That morning, neighbors had mentioned seeing more snakes due to recent rains. Jorge's wife had even suggested he wear boots while clearing brush, but he hadn't. The pile of cut branches where they were working was precisely the kind of temporary heap where snakes like to hide. Raúl later recalled warning Jorge to be careful, but Jorge dismissed their concerns, saying he would work quickly. When Jorge shifted his position, the snake struck without warning. It burst from the leaves and bit his skin just above the ankle. Raúl and Mateo heard Jorge cry out sharply and saw him pull back his foot, clutching at the wound. Before they could react, the snake bit him a second time. Dark blood stained the dirt where his foot had been. The pain was immediate and intense. Jorge doubled over, dropping the fruit he was holding. Within minutes, his lower leg began to swell, the skin becoming bruised and discolored. He started vomiting and sweating profusely, his face turning pale. Raúl quickly tied a piece of cloth above the bite marks, and they fashioned a splint from a broom handle to keep Jorge's leg still. A neighbor brought a small wooden cart, and they lifted Jorge into it, pushing it toward the dirt road leading back to the village. The journey to the clinic was slow and bumpy. Dust coated Jorge's damp skin, and he grew confused, speaking incoherently and drifting in and out of consciousness. At the small village clinic, a nurse examined his swollen leg, noting his weak pulse and low blood press. The clinic had basic medical supplies, but no anti-venom, the specialized medicine needed to treat snake bites. The staff used their radio to contact the regional health center, requesting assistance, but the nearest supply of anti-venom and a properly equipped ambulance were hours away. Jorge's condition deteriorated rapidly. He became increasingly disoriented, his breathing shallow. The medical staff were helpless to stop the progression. By evening, Jorge had died at the clinic despite their efforts to stem the bleeding and assist his breathing. Raúl mentioned that they had tried to kill the snake, but it had vanished into the dense plants. I've read stories that stay with me, stories that whisper of unseen dangers lurking beneath the surface of the familiar. The story of Mina Belogan is one of those. It was May 2nd, 2018. The air over the Cross River felt heavy, still. Mina, just 19, had recently returned from university. She loved spending afternoons at the river, often bringing her cousins to swim, despite warnings from the older villagers about snakes being more active during the dry season. She thought nothing dangerous could ever happen in the shallows. On that day, she convinced 4 cousins to join her. She dreamed of starting a community project to teach younger children how to swim safely, seeing the river as a place full of life, not danger. Her cousins trusted her, following her without worry into the cool water. The river's surface was calm, mirroring the cloudless sky, but as the locals knew, something was always moving underneath. They chose a wide, shallow part of the river with muddy banks favoured by fishermen. Dragonflies danced above the water's surface. But the thick plants on the far side cast long shadows over the deeper parts. Earlier that week, a fisherman had warned Mina's uncle about a large python sunning itself on a nearby log. Children had been told not to swim until the rains came and raised the water levels, but Mina insisted their shallow bend was safe. She'd been in the water almost an hour when one of her cousins spotted something long and dark moving toward them. At first, they thought it was a tree branch, but when it curved and moved silently, fear gripped the children. The shape moved quickly, revealing the patterned body of an enormous python. The snake attacked with shocking speed. Its jaws locked onto Mina's side, its body coiling around her. Her cousin screamed as the snake tightened its grip, forcing the air from her lungs. The water churned as Mina fought, then stilled as the python dragged her deeper. The children ran back to the village, screaming for help. It took precious minutes for the men to grab their knives and reach the river. By then, the snake had pulled Mina under. The men cut at the python until it finally released her. They pulled her onto the muddy bank. She had been underwater for too long. Her skin was cold and pale, her lips a deep blue. The villagers tried pressing on her chest, blowing air into her mouth. Water mixed with mud poured from her mouth and nose. Someone recorded the desperate scene. But it was too late. Mina's body was placed on a mat near the water as the villagers gathered in silence. For weeks, the riverbend remained empty. Fishermen avoided it, calling the area cursed. The village learned that even familiar places could hide unexpected dangers, especially when animals sought water and food near human settlements. Mina's dream of teaching children to swim safely took on a new, urgent meaning, as the community worked to prevent such tragedies from happening again. I remember another story, a different place, but the same sense of unexpected danger. It was June 10th, 2013, in Sweetwater, Texas. The fairground was scorching under a clear sky. Samuel "Sammy" Price, 38, a volunteer snake handler at the annual rattlesnake roundup since childhood, was there. He was respected in town. He did repair work and showed up every year to handle snakes for visitors. There's something about snake handling that can fool you into thinking you're in control. I've seen it happen so many times. The years of experience, the steady hands, they create a false sense of security. But nature, especially in the form of a stressed rattlesnake, can be unpredictable. Sammy, a seasoned handler, knew this better than most. He taught new volunteers, always emphasizing hands-on experience, as the best way to reduce danger. He was trusted because he was careful, never rushing, and always correcting mistakes gently. But this year, the festival was bigger, the schedule tighter. He'd been moving between snake pits all morning, answering questions, spending hours in the sun. He'd skipped breakfast to keep things running smoothly, and he was feeling it. His co-workers told him to rest, but he kept working, thinking it was just the heat and exhaustion. When asked to do one more demonstration that afternoon, he agreed, seeing it as his responsibility. The roundup used shallow pits with temporary barriers, a raised platform for the announcer, folding chairs for the audience. The air was thick with the smells of fried food, car exhaust, and dust. Shade cloths and water were nearby, but the layout was cramped, keeping everyone in the sun. People leaned against the fence, phones raised, recording every movement. The setup allowed for clear viewing, but it reduced space for the handlers and limited opportunities to cool down. Western diamondback rattlesnakes, those strong pit vipers, average 4 to 5 feet long. Their venom causes tissue damage and bleeding, potentially triggering shock. Even skilled handlers can be bitten when a snake is already stressed, or when heat and repeated handling increase that stress. Earlier that day, organizers had warned everyone to take turns and limit heavy handling during the hottest hours. A small incident that morning had prompted a formal reminder to take breaks and drink water. Medical personnel were standing by with IV fluids and anti-venom. Sammy heard the instructions, agreed with them, but the crowd and the busy schedule pulled him back. He took a heavy Western diamondback from a colleague and stepped into the pit, wearing a leather glove and carrying a snake hook. He lifted the snake with practiced ease. For a moment, the crowd relaxed, calmed by Sammy's steady presence. Then the snake shifted, its body twisting sharply under stress. It lunged, and its fangs pierced the soft tissue near Sammy's elbow. Pain shot through his arm. He signaled that he was more, but his face flushed, and sweat beaded on his forehead. He kept talking to the crowd for several minutes, but his breathing grew shallow, and he asked for a chair. The bite area swelled rapidly, discoloration spreading down his forearm. Within minutes, the swelling moved past his elbow toward his shoulder, the skin darkening with mottled bruising as tissue damage progressed. Volunteers moved him to the first aid tent when it was clear he could no longer stand. Paramedics applied press to slow the venom's spread, started IV fluids, and administered the first vials of antivenom. His breathing became shallow, his skin cold and blotched. Despite the rapid treatment, his blood pressure collapsed and his pulse faded. Witnesses later recalled the frantic attempts to keep him conscious as medics called for an airlift that never arrived in time. In the aftermath, friends and fellow handlers organized training sessions, inviting regional medics to review emergency procedures and practice drills. A younger relative of Sammy's began helping at the pits, prioritizing taking turns and staying hydrated over putting on a good show. The festival board documented the incident and created a checklist for demonstrations, including maximum handling time, required breaks, and a fast evacuation plan to the nearest ambulance access point. It's a stark reminder of how quickly things can go wrong, even with the best intentions and years of experience. Now, if you'll allow me, I want to shift gears to another story, one that unfolded far away in the dense rainforests of southeastern Cameroon. It was March 15th, 2016. Towering mahogany trees stretched endlessly under the humid canopy. Hidden among thick jungle vegetation near the Sangha River, a converted logging camp sat isolated on 50 acres of abandoned concession land. The property had once housed a legitimate primate research station with proper government permits, but those days were long gone. Erica Winslow, a 52-year-old former wildlife photographer from America, had been operating this facility illegally for 3 years after her research permits expired. What she refused to surrender was Caesar, an 18-year-old Western lowland gorilla weighing 375 pounds. Erica's demanding personality and entitled behavior had made her notorious among local officials and village chiefs. She constantly complained about wildlife inspections and refused to acknowledge that her research permits had expired. With no formal primate training, she relied entirely on YouTube videos and outdated zoo management methods she found online. Her social media posts showed increasingly erratic behavior as she attempted to discipline Caesar using intimidation tactics. The massive silverback had been displaying heightened territorial aggression for weeks, throwing branches at visitors and damaging the reinforced walls of his enclosure. Local villagers reported loud chest beating throughout the night, and Caesar had been refusing to enter his night shelter for the past 2 weeks, defying Erica's commands entirely. Cameroon's Ministry of Forestry and Wildlife had been building a case to seize the animals, but corruption and bureaucratic delays, well, they complicated matters. It's hard to imagine the scene those local villagers stumbled upon. I've read the reports a dozen times, but the details still feel unreal. A silverback gorilla, calmly grooming blood from his hands, next to the lifeless body of a woman named Erica. Her skull was fractured, brain matter exposed on the concrete floor. The tragedy, as I understand it, unfolded because Caesar, a Western lowland gorilla with the strength of 10 men, had been kept in improper conditions. Warning signs had been mounting for months, signals that Erica, his caretaker, perhaps missed or ignored. These animals, so powerful, can become unpredictably violent when stressed, especially if they perceive a threat. Erica's frustration apparently reached a breaking point that evening. Caesar was refusing to go into his night quarters, and she decided to assert her dominance. She grabbed a makeshift electric prod and unlocked the gate to his enclosure, a pen only 20 by 30 feet. It was a fatal decision. As she stepped inside, the electrical device in her hand, Caesar went from passive resistance to explosive aggression in an instant. The 375-pound gorilla charged, slamming into Erica with incredible force, launching her into the metal fence. The rusted metal cut into her back as Caesar's hands grabbed her face, his thumbs pressing into her eye sockets. The attack was brutal. His fingernails tore at her skin, and his jaws clamped down on her left ear, severing it. Erica's screams, the reports say, echoed across the empty rainforest. The gorilla bit her right hand, crushing 3 fingers, then lifted her body and shook her violently. Her shoulder dislocated as he slammed her face into the concrete floor, shattering her nose. He twisted her leg, snapping her femur, and then brought both fists down on her rib cage, cracking 6 ribs and puncturing her lungs. Finally, he squeezed her head until her skull cracked. Afterward, Caesar sat calmly beside her body for 4 hours. Cameroonian authorities launched an investigation, and wildlife officials worked to relocate him to the Lima Wildlife Center. The incident, as you might imagine, reignited the debate about foreign nationals operating illegal wildlife facilities and the dangers posed to everyone involved. A similar tragedy, I've learned, unfolded in Idaho. It was July 22nd, 2017, along the Salmon River, where the Price family was on their annual camping trip. This year was different though. They had Scout with them, a mountain cougar cub that Landon Price, the father, had purchased from an exotic animal dealer 2 years earlier. Landon, a construction foreman, was convinced his experience with domestic animals would translate to raising a wild predator. He kept the growing cougar in a reinforced shed, telling neighbors it was just a large dog. It's a fatal error to assume a wild animal ever truly loses its instincts, even when raised by humans. I've seen it time and again in my research. Hunting behaviors in particular seem to become amplified in unfamiliar settings, where territorial urges flare. I recall one tragic case. Landon thought he was doing right by Scout, his 3-year-old cougar. He opened the transport crate, wanting to let Scout stretch and explore the wilderness. He really thought Scout's upbringing had somehow softened the animal's wild side, treating a predator like a house cat. As the family set up their fishing gear, Scout emerged and immediately began surveying. His coat blended perfectly, and his yellow eyes scanned everything. That 140-pound cougar's predatory instincts kicked in the moment Landon walked toward the river to fill water containers. Scout crouched low, pupils dilated, muscles coiling. His tail twitched, a clear sign. He launched himself, silent and fast, covering 20 feet in a single leap. His body struck Landon in the back. 4-inch claws sank deep. The cougar's jaws clamped down on the back of Landon's neck with such precision. Those canine teeth, designed for this, punctured the cervical vertebrae, severing the spinal cord instantly. Paralysis. Landon drowned within 90 seconds, face submerged, body limp. Scout, following millions of years of programming, dragged the body toward the brush. Sarah grabbed Emma and Jake, rushing them to the safety of their locked truck. They waited there for 3 terrifying hours until park rangers arrived. An investigation started immediately, focusing on the illegal possession of the cougar. The incident reignited debates about owning exotic animals and the dangers they pose. Another case that comes to mind occurred on September 8, 2015, on a sprawling ranch in South Texas. The remote property, miles from anyone, was perfect for Marcus Ellison's dangerous hobby. The 41-year-old oil rig worker had turned an old barn into a makeshift big cat facility. Marcus shared the property with his girlfriend, Lisa Chen, a 28-year-old vet tech who was increasingly worried about their housemate. 4 years earlier, Marcus had bought Luna, a 6-month-old jaguar cub, from a black market dealer. His desire to collect dangerous animals as status symbols had led him to spend his earnings on exotic pets. Luna had grown into a powerful 180-pound predator, but Marcus believed their bond would protect him. Lisa had been pressuring him to surrender Luna, especially after witnessing the jaguar's erratic behavior. The warning signs had been mounting. Luna had been refusing food for 4 days, even her favorite cuts of meat. She had begun territorial marking, leaving her scent throughout the house. Her pacing had worn visible paths in her enclos. Lisa noticed that Luna's pupils remained constantly dilated, indicating severe psychological stress. Neighbors reported strange vocalizations during the night. Jaguars are the 3rd largest big cats and have the strongest bite force of any feline. They can crush turtle shells and caiman skulls. Apex predators, perfectly designed, with muscular bodies and jaws that can exert over 1,500 pounds of press per square inch. Unlike other big cats, jaguars deliver precise killing bites directly through the skull or spine. Even hand-raised jaguars retain their wild instincts and can become unpredictably aggressive. Marcus made his fatal mistake when he entered Luna's enclosure without backup or safety equipment. Concerned about her food refusal, he believed their bond would allow him to safely investigate. He unlocked the gate to her pen and stepped inside, carrying only a small flashlight. Luna sat motionless in the shadows, her yellow eyes reflecting the beam. The 180-pound jaguar had been waiting. As Marcus knelt 15 feet away and extended his hand in what he thought was comfort, Luna's predatory instincts took over. Her muscles propelled her across the enclosure in 2 bounds. Her attack was swift and devastating. Her massive body slammed into Marcus's chest. I've spent years studying the tragic intersection of humans and apex predators, and certain cases still haunt me. Take the story of Marcus, for instance. He was killed almost instantly. A jaguar named Luna clamped her jaws around his throat with surgical precision, crushing his windpipe and severing both carotid arteries. The bite force of 1,500 pounds per square inch and a swift end. Luna held her grip for 3 minutes, a testament to her natural instinct. Only then did she begin to feed. Lisa, arriving the next morning, found Luna calmly grooming blood from her paws, with Marcus's body lying nearby. The incident, as you might imagine, reignited the debate about exotic animal ownership. Marcus's own family released a statement acknowledging the dangers of keeping wild predators. Another case, equally tragic, unfolded on June 14, 2018, in Homestead, Florida. Behind a modest rental house, an elaborate pond system had become home to Brutus, a 9-foot American alligator. Brianna Ellis, a 26-year-old marine biology student, was using the pond for her thesis research. She'd rescued Brutus 2 years prior from a roadside attraction, believing she could provide him with a better environment. Her landlord, however, remained blissfully unaware that a 350-pound apex predator was living in his backyard. The warning signs were there. Brutus had become increasingly aggressive, lunging at the pond's edge during feeding. Neighbors complained of strange splashing sounds at night. Yet, Brianna, confident in her scientific understanding, continued hand-feeding him. American alligators are, after all, among the most efficient predators on Earth. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weights exceeding 800 pounds. Their jaws can exert nearly 3,000 pounds of press per square inch, enough to crush a bowling ball. Brianna made her fatal mistake as the sun set. She dropped her pH testing equipment into the pond and insisted on retrieving it herself, despite Kevin's suggestion to use a net. Dusk, of course, is the most active hunting period for alligators. As Brianna waded into the pond, Brutus began his approach. The 350-pound alligator moved through the water with incredible precision, creating no visible wake. Brianna, focused on her task, remained unaware that Brutus had positioned himself just 6 feet away. The attack came with devastating force. Brutus launched himself upward, his jaws encompassing Brianna's entire right thigh. The jaw press crushed her femur instantly. Her screams pierced the evening air as Brutus began his signature death roll. The rotational force tore Brianna's leg completely away at the hip joint within seconds, severing her femoral artery. Before she could escape, Brutus attacked again, clamping down on her torso. I've seen the aftermath of attacks like this, and the details always stay with you. Imagine a man dragged toward the deepest part of a pond, the thrashing beneath the surface as an alligator performs its drowning technique. Lungs filling with water and blood. It happened on October 3, 2016, in the Adirondack Mountains, upstate New York, a place where the evergreens seem to touch the autumn sky. 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, a weathered log cabin stood, reachable only by a narrow dirt road. This was home to Shah Gallagher, a 38-year-old former wildlife rehabilitator. His career ended in disgrace 3 years earlier, and he retreated to this inherited family property, bitter and paranoid after a bear incident left him with a permanent limp and a lost license. Sean shared his remote sanctuary with Kodiak, an 8-year-old American black bear weighing 400 pounds. He had illegally acquired the animal as an injured cub 3 years prior, claiming to rescue it from certain death. His obsession with proving his rehabilitation methods were superior to state-approved programs drove him to keep Kodiak, despite losing his professional credentials. The bear lived in a reinforced room within the cabin, a makeshift arrangement that grew increasingly inadequate as Kodiak matured. Sean's journal entries from recent weeks revealed a growing paranoia about the bear's intentions, his mental state deteriorating from years of isolation. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically over the past month. Kodiak was systematically destroying the cabin's interior, tearing apart furniture and clawing deep gouges in the wooden walls. The bear had become increasingly aggressive when Sean attempted to limit his food, displaying territorial behavior that should have served as a clear warning. Most concerning was Kodiak's obsessive testing of door and window strength, repeatedly pushing against barriers as if calculating escape routes. American black bears are deceptively powerful predators despite their smaller size compared to grizzlies. Adult males can reach speeds of 30 millibiths and possess the strength to overturn boulders weighing several hundred pounds. Their jaws can exert over 800 pounds of pres per square inch, easily capable of crushing human skulls, while their 4-inch claws are designed for climbing and digging, but are devastatingly effective weapons. Black bears are naturally nocturnal, most active during twilight and nighttime hours when their predatory instincts are heightened. Sean made his fatal mistake at 2:30 in the morning, when he decided to enter Kodiak's reinforced room to retrieve his damaged laptop and camera equipment. The bear appeared to be sleeping peacefully in the corner of the 15-20 foot space, his massive form barely visible in the darkness. Sean desperately needed to recover his electronics before they were completely destroyed by the bear's ongoing rampage. He stepped quietly into the room, carrying only a small flashlight, believing Kodiak was in deep sleep. What Sean failed to realize was that Kodiak had been awake for hours, waiting with the patience that makes black bears such effective predators. The bear's naturally nocturnal behavior meant his senses were at peak alertness during these early morning hours, and captivity had made him increasingly territorial about his confined space. The 400-pound black bear moved with surprising speed and agility. Kodiak rose to his full height of 7 feet and charged across the room in 3 powerful strides. Shaun had no time to react as the bear's enormous frame filled his vision. Kodiak's first strike came from his massive right paw, equipped with 4-inch claws designed by nature for climbing and digging. The blow struck Shaun squarely in the chest with tremendous force, his claws raking 4 parallel gashes across his ribcage that penetrated deep into muscle and bone. The impact launched Shaun backward into the reinforced wall with bone-crushing force. Before Shaun could even attempt to defend himself, Kodiak pressed his attack with methodical efficiency. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on Shaun's head, encompassing his skull from temple to temple. Kodiak's bite force of 800 pounds per square inch crushed Shaun's skull like an eggshell, causing immediate and catastrophic brain trauma. Brain matter leaked between the bear's teeth as he shook his massive head violently. Shaun's body went completely limp within seconds, but Kodiak's defensive rage kept driving the assault. The bear mauled with relentless power, claws raking and jaws crushing bone, as if to eliminate a threat rather than feed. In his fury, Kodiak tore into Shaun's torso, ribs splintering under the prise, leaving a scene of raw devastation born not of hunger, but of instinctive dominance and fear. The attack continued for 15 minutes before Kodiak finally retreated to his corner, leaving Shaun's partially consumed remains scattered across the wooden floor. The bear sat calmly, grooming blood from its claws and muzzle. Shaun's body was discovered 3 days later when concerned neighbours noticed smoke was no longer rising from the cabin's chimney. Local authorities launched an eye. I've always been drawn to stories where humans and animals intersect, often with tragic consequences. I remember one case in Texas. It stayed with me for days. It was March 22nd, 2015, just outside Houston. The air was thick, almost soupy. Behind a small ranch house, inside a chain-link enclosure, a Bengal tiger paced restlessly. The tiger belonged to Michael Torres, a 41-year-old mechanic. He was a loner, really, more comfortable with engines than people. He'd started with snakes and iguanas, then a serval, and finally Raja, a 6-year-old Bengal tiger he'd bought from a private breeder. He kept Raja in a large enclosure, reinforced with steel and heavy wire. Neighbours had seen him walking with the tiger on a chain, talking to it like a friend. Michael believed Raja recognized his scent, his tone. He even claimed the animal would never hurt him. He said it was all about trust, earning respect through calm handling, not fear. That afternoon, the air was heavy. A friend, Luis Alvarez, stopped by to borrow a wrench and stayed to watch as Michael went toward the cage. Raja was pacing more than usual, his tail flicking. Construction noise from a nearby property seemed to bother him. Michael said the tiger didn't like loud sounds, but would settle down once he started cleaning. Bengal tigers, you see, are apex predators. Their bite can crush bone. Even those raised from cubs retain those instincts: stalking, ambushing. Male tigers can weigh over 400 pounds and strike with enough force to shatter ribs. They rarely growl as a warning. Often, it's just movement that triggers them. Luis stood about 20 yards away as Michael opened the inner gate. He was replacing old straw, raking droppings into a bin. He'd left the outer gate partially open for the wheelbarrow. It wasn't the first time. Luis said that as Michael worked, Raja kept pacing, muscles tensing. Michael glanced up once, muttered something, and bent to lift a shovel. Then Luis saw the tiger freeze. Its ears flattened, body crouched low, tail twitching. A second later, Raja lunged. The impact was a hollow sound, metal and flesh. The tiger's paw raked across Michael's face, knocking him down. He screamed, clutching his jaw, trying to crawl toward the gate. Raja followed, clamped its jaws around his neck and shoulder, and dragged him deeper into the enclosure. Luis shouted, threw a wrench, but it just clattered against the fence. Michael swung the shovel, hitting Raja's snout, but the tiger's jaws only tightened. Luis threw gravel, screaming for the tiger to stop. Raja shook its head violently, lifting and slamming Michael's body against the ground. Michael's arm twitched, then went still. Raja kept biting, dragging the body under a metal shelter. Luis ran for his truck and called 911. Deputies arrived and waited for animal control with tranquilizer rifles. But when Raja charged the fencing, an officer fired his service rifle, hitting the tiger in the shoulder. Raja collapsed near the shelter, exhaling once before going still. Michael's body had massive lacerations to the neck, chest, and abdomen. One arm was partially severed, and his face was unrecognizable. Investigators noted he had no secondary containment system, no safety barrier or secondary lock. The open gate gave the tiger full access. Animal control removed Raja's body that night. Michael's sister handled arrangements quietly, declining interviews. Fewer than 20 people attended his funeral. Neighbors left flowers at the fence. The straw inside was still stained dark. Not all stories like this happen in America. I recall another case. It was January 14th, 2016, in Surabaya, Indonesia. The morning air was heavy with humidity. Behind a row of warehouses, one lot stood apart. It was quiet, save for the clank of metal and the scrape of claws against concrete. Within those walls, a private experiment in control was nearing its breaking point. Ahmad Feros was 34, an auto parts importer. He was patient and meticulous, but his fascination with exotic animals was well known. I've always been drawn to the stories where the line blurs, where we think we understand an animal, only to find we're mistaken. There was a man named Ahmad who kept a Komodo dragon at the warehouse where he worked. He'd raised it from a juvenile, feeding it by hand. He thought it knew him. But one Thursday, that trust shattered. Ahmad had skipped feeding the dragon the night before. He found its water basin overturned. As he entered the enclosure, wanting to clean it, the dragon was still, motionless in the corner. Komodo dragons are ambush predators. They can grow to 10 feet long, with a bite strong enough to crush bone, venom that causes rapid blood loss. In captivity, they can become aggressive, especially if underfed. Ahmad never realized he was always prey. One of Ahmad's co-workers, Yudi, heard a clang and a cry. He ran to the back and saw Ahmad fall. The dragon had latched onto Ahmad's right calf. Ahmad yelled for help as blood darkened the concrete. The dragon released, then lunged again, clamping down on Ahmad's forearm. Ahmad tried to pull away, but the animal twisted its head, shaking loose strips of muscle. Yudi grabbed a metal pole and struck the dragon's side. It turned, mouth gaping, tongue flicking. Ahmad tried to crawl backward, leaving a smear of blood. The dragon lunged again, catching his side just below the ribs, teeth sinking deep. Ahmad's scream broke into a rasp. Yudi struck again until the creature backed off. Ahmad slumped onto his back, eyes open, one hand pressed against the wound. The concrete gleamed dark red. Yudi dragged a burlap sack, waving it near the dragon's face to distract it, then pulled the gate shut. He turned to Ahmad, who was still. The blood loss had been catastrophic. By the time emergency responders arrived, Ahmad was gone. He had suffered multiple deep lacerations and significant internal bleeding. Veterinarians later said the dragon had shown signs of food aggression. Police contacted Indonesia's Natural Resources Conservation Agency. The Komodo dragon, just under 7 feet long and weighing nearly 140 pounds, was sedated and transported to a wildlife rehabilitation centre. Officials confirmed it had been obtained through illegal trade networks. The story reached local newspapers for a day. Neighbours remembered Ahmad as generous. But within the warehouse community, the story circulated as a quiet warning. It reminded me of another case I read about that occurred on May 30th, 2014, near Bozeman, Montana. The morning was clear, still. Inside a small animal sanctuary, one enclosure stood larger than the rest. Its occupant paced slow, deliberate circles. By noon, that silence would be shattered. The owner, Mark Jennings, was a former wildlife handler who'd built the sanctuary. He ran school tours, wildlife demonstrations, and rescue programs. His pride was a 1,000-pound brown bear named Bruno, raised from a cub. Mark believed Bruno proved that wild animals could bond with humans through trust rather than fear. Bruno had been with him for nearly 12 years, intelligent and calm around people he knew. The enclosure was spacious, with reinforced fencing, a pond, and a shaded feeding platform. Mark managed most care himself, but occasionally brought in help. Aaron Cole was one of those helpers. A licensed trainer who had worked with Bruno multiple times without issue. Mark trusted her completely, enough to call her one of the few people Bruno recognized. I've always been drawn to the moments when the wild world clashes with our own, often with tragic consequences. I remember reading about a sanctuary, rolling pasture bordered by pines, early summer sunlight, and then the screams. Aaron arrived early that morning to prepare Bruno's meal, 15 pounds of meat mixed with supplements. Mark, who ran the place, had left the previous evening to visit his sister. Before leaving, he reminded Aaron to feed Bruno at the usual time, late morning, and to check the water trough afterward. The next day, he texted Aaron around 10, receiving no reply. Assuming she was busy, he began his drive back. When he pulled into the gravel lot just after noon, he noticed the outer gate to the bare enclosure was half open, the feeding pail overturned beside it. Seconds later, he heard screaming from beyond the fence line. He ran toward the sound, rounding the corner to see Bruno towering near the feeding platform. Aaron was on the ground beneath him, her right arm torn open from shoulder to wrist. She kicked weakly, her clothes soaked dark with blood. The bear's movements were methodical, broad swipes, a deep huffing sound between each motion. Mark froze for a moment, then shouted Bruno's name and ran for a rake leaning against the fence. The noise drew Bruno's attention immediately. He turned, fur bristling, and lunged. The charge covered the distance in a second. The impact knocked Mark flat, the air leaving his lungs in a single sound. Bruno's paw struck his chest again, the claws sinking deep enough to tear through fabric and skin. Aaron saw Mark roll, trying to crawl back toward the gate, but the bear dropped onto him, pressing its full weight down. Bruno bit into Mark's left shoulder, shaking violently, then adjusted its grip, jaws closing on his neck. Investigators later reconstructed the sequence from Aaron's statement and evidence found inside the enclosure. The entire attack lasted under 30 seconds. Aaron dragged herself backward, her hand leaving red streaks along the concrete. She made it to the open gate, pushing herself through the dirt until she collapsed near the outer fence. Blood loss blurred her vision, but she heard Mark's shouting, "Stop!" Abruptly replaced by heavy breathing and the rhythmic scrape of claws on the ground. Deputies arrived minutes later, responding to a 911 call placed by a neighbor who had heard the screams. They found Bruno standing over Mark's body, huffing and lowering his head as they approached. When an officer fired a warning shot, the bear reared back, roaring. The second volley hit him directly in the chest and shoulder. Bruno staggered, exhaled sharply. The medical report confirmed that Mark had died from blunt and penetrating trauma to the thorax and cervical region. Aaron survived after multiple surgeries to repair her arm and shoulder. Investigators determined that the feeding gate had been improperly secured, allowing Bruno to push through before the pail was placed. Food aggression was cited as the cause, a sudden response to perceived competition over the meal. In the months following the attack, Aaron withdrew from animal work entirely. She sold her training equipment, moved to Missoula, and refused interviews. Friends said she became quiet, often waking from sleep at the faint sound of metal gates or animal breathing. She never returned to the sanctuary grounds. It brings to mind another incident. August 19, 2017, in the Limpopo province of South Africa. The air was heavy from the previous night's storm, the ground damp, and the acacia trees still dripping. At Johan Boer's game lodge, in the lion enclosure beyond the guest bungalows, the large male paced in slow, deliberate circles. By mid-morning, tourists had yet to arrive, and Johan decided to tend to the animal himself, a routine he had done hundreds of times before. A routine that would end differently this time. Johan was 46, a former ranger who had turned his modest patch of bushland into a profitable wildlife lodge, known for his confidence around big cats. He was comfortable where others were cautious. Over the years, he had cultivated an image of connection between man and predator. His prized attraction was Simba, a 7-year-old male lion raised at the lodge since cubhood. Tourists paid to pose with him through the fence, and sometimes, for higher fees, Johan would lead them into the outer section of the enclosure for photographs. He saw it as education and conservation mixed with business. To staff, Johan was competent but stubborn. He had a habit of trusting his instincts over protocols. Employees described him as meticulous with animal care, yet dismissive of warnings when it came to Simba. The lion was full-grown, nearly 500 pounds, and though raised in captivity, he retained the instincts of a wild predator. Still, Johan insisted Simba recognized him as the one constant presence, often entering the cage to clean or adjust the feeding structure alone. Adult male lions, especially those kept in captivity, exhibit erratic behavior when stressed. Their territorial instincts can surge unpredictably, especially after storms when scents shift and sound travels differently. A single swipe of a paw can break bone. Their bite, over 650 pounds per square inch, is built to crush windpipes. Even with long-term handlers, moments of agitation can become fatal within seconds. According to pieced-together evidence and reports, Simba had been restless since the thunderstorm. The overnight lightning had sent him pacing and roaring through the night, rubbing his mane against the fence. Caretaker Peter LaRue noticed the behavior early and told Johan that morning to postpone cleaning until the animal calmed down. Johan brushed it off, saying the lion got anxious if ignored. Around 9 a.m., Johan took a broom and bucket toward the enclos while a visiting maintenance worker tested a new camera. There are moments I wish I could unsee. Moments captured on film that reveal the sudden, brutal shift from calm to chaos. I'm thinking of one in particular. A seemingly ordinary day at a wildlife lodge, a man named Jan sweeping near a lion enclos. The camera, recording casually, captured what happened next. Simba, the lion, had been pacing. Then, with a suddenness that still shocks me, he lunged. The video, along with later interviews, painted a terrifying picture. One moment, Jan was sweeping, speaking softly. The next, he was on the ground, Simba's jaws clamped around his shoulder. Jan fought back, pushing against the lion's muzzle, but Simba shifted his grip, teeth sinking into the back of his neck. The sounds of deep growling drowned out Jan's cries as Simba dragged him toward a shaded area. A fellow employee tried to intervene, throwing water, but it was no use. The attack was relentless. Simba bit into Jan's throat, a final, efficient motion. Jan's body went limp. Rangers arrived quickly, firing tranquilizer darts. Simba collapsed beside Jan. The team recovered Jan's body, his clothing torn and soaked with blood. The autopsy revealed crushing trauma and severe blood loss. The lodge closed, and Simba was euthanized. The incident was deemed preventable, a result of complacency and poor safety. Now, I want to turn to another case, one that unfolded on October 6, 2013, in Mobile, Alabama. Two chimpanzees, housed in cages behind a modest brick house. Within an hour, a small routine would turn violent and irreversible. Linda Reeves, a retired lab technician, had adopted these chimps, Buddy and Rosie, raising them since they were infants. To her, they were family. But her brother, Tom, worried. The chimps had grown strong, their instincts amplified by captivity. Tom had warned Linda repeatedly that they were no longer controllable. That Sunday morning, Linda entered the enclos with a bowl of fruit. Buddy reached for the fruit before she gave the signal, grabbing her wrist. She scolded him, and something shifted. Tom saw it immediately. Buddy lunged, knocking Linda backward. I still remember the feeling of disbelief that lingered after Linda's funeral. How could a bond built over years turn fatal in seconds? The enclos was eventually dismantled, leaving just a bare patch of concrete, stained faintly dark, where the hose couldn't wash everything away. It was April 17, 2015, just outside Chicago. A bright, warm afternoon. Yellow school buses pulled into the parking lot of a small private animal park. A roadside zoo with fading paint and rust showing through its old fences. Families with strollers mixed with school groups, teachers trying to keep order as students pointed at parrots, goats, and monkeys in cramped pens. The chimpanzee exhibit sat near the middle of the park, behind a low chain-link railing and a shallow algae-lined moat. A hand-painted sign read, "No climbing or leaning on fence." Inside were 2 adult males and a younger female, living among wooden climbing structures and a patch of worn grass. The walls were streaked with moisture, and the enclosure looked outdated compared to what you'd see in larger accredited zoos. Matthew Collins was 12 years old, a 6th grader on a spring field trip. His mother worked nights as a nurse, and his father operated a forklift. They didn't travel much, but Matthew loved animals and never missed a chance to see them up close. His teachers described him as bright but impulsive, a boy who liked to climb anything taller than himself. He carried a second-hand digital camera, saved for by mowing lawns. His plan was simple: get the best photos of the chimps out of anyone in his class. By mid-afternoon, the group gathered near the chimp enclosure. The air smelled of hay, damp earth, and the sour trace of leftover feed. The students crowded against the metal barrier, talking and laughing while their teacher gave instructions. Matthew, standing near the back, raised his camera, but couldn't get a clear view. Wanting a better angle, he stepped onto the lower rail for balance. A few classmates noticed and motioned for him to stop, but he ignored them, focused on his shot, and leaned forward. The railing was slick with humidity, and the ledge beneath his shoe gave slightly. As he leaned forward to center the chimps in the frame, his foot slipped. A few students gasped as his arms windmilled for balance. Then he dropped over the rail and into the pit below, landing hard on his right side, rolling onto his stomach with a groan. Teachers screamed his name. Some kids started crying. For a moment, the enclosure was silent, except for the soft panting of the chimps. Then one of the males, an older broad-shouldered chimp named Bo, stood upright, bristling with tension. He gave a sharp hoot, slapped the dirt, and started toward the boy. The younger male followed, puffing air through his lips in short bursts. Visitors said the sounds were chilling, deep hoots rising in pitch, the rhythmic drumming of palms on the ground. The 2 chimps stopped about 10 feet away, heads tilted, eyes fixed on the strange figure that had dropped into their space. Bo took 2 quick steps forward and grabbed a fistful of Matthew's shirt. Matthew screamed and tried to crawl backward, but the chimp's grip was iron. Bo's first strike wasn't a feeding bite, but a dominance blow. A sharp smack to the side of the head knocked the boy sideways. Then came the bite. A hard, fast clamp on the arm near the wrist. The smaller male joined in, pulling at the boy's sleeve and striking his shoulder. The sounds of hitting and tearing mixed with hoots and panicked screams from above. A zookeeper stationed near a nearby enclosure heard the commotions and ran toward the enclosure, shouting for the crowd to move back. He grabbed a hose from the maintenance shed and sprayed into the pit, the high-press stream breaking the chimp's focus for seconds at a time. Bo let go, slapped the ground, and charged forward again, stopping inches from the water spray. The younger male backed away, pacing in circles while pant-hooting. For nearly half a minute, the two chimps alternated between lunging and retreating as keepers threw fruit and banged metal poles against the barrier to draw them off. Eventually, Bo released his grip on the torn fabric of Matthew's shirt. There are moments when an animal's inherent wildness can overwhelm years of familiarity. I've seen it in the field, that sudden, unpredictable shift. No amount of affection or domestication can truly erase it. On a seemingly ordinary June day in Stamford, Connecticut, that's exactly what happened. The afternoon was quiet, marked only by the sounds of lawn mowers and passing cars. Houses stood neatly along Rockledge Drive, each with trimmed lawns. But inside one of those homes, a woman named Belinda Holmes was about to experience an attack that would send shockwaves through the community. Belinda was 57 and known for keeping a very unusual companion, a male chimpanzee named Charlie. She'd acquired Charlie as an infant years before, seemingly ignoring state laws that prohibited owning such animals. She raised him like a child, dressing him in clothes, feeding him at the table, driving him around in her car. Friends said she was utterly devoted, convinced she could control him like any other pet. For years, Charlie was a local spectacle. Children would stare as he looked out the windows. Neighbors would watch Belinda walk him on a leash through the yard. She treated him like family, defending him against anyone who voiced concern. But there were signs. Charlie had grown, weighing over 120 pounds by the age of 12. Belinda struggled to restrain him when he was upset, but she insisted he was gentle, simply misunderstood. The house itself bore witness to years of living with the animal. Furniture was scratched and damaged from his climbing. The air often carried a distinct animal musk. Charlie moved freely through the rooms, from the kitchen to the living room, and out to the small backyard. On that particular June day, the weather was warm, and the windows were open. Charlie was restless, pacing and making noises as Belinda tried to calm him with fruit and snacks. But years of living in a human household hadn't erased his natural instincts. When stressed or frustrated, a chimpanzee's aggression can surface suddenly, with a violence that no amount of familiarity can truly prevent. There had been warnings. Months earlier, a neighbor had called animal control after Charlie escaped into the yard. He chased cars and pounded on a vehicle before Belinda managed to bring him back inside. State officials reminded her that owning him was illegal, but she ignored the fines. Friends noticed that Charlie was becoming irritable around strangers, but Belinda continued to insist he was harmless. On the afternoon of June 11th, his agitation was clear. He banged on the table, knocked over a chair, and bared his teeth. Belinda moved closer, trying to grab his arm. That's when the attack began. Charlie lunged, slamming Belinda backward into the couch. His hands gripped her shoulders, and his teeth sank into her face with terrible force. Neighbors heard the commotion through the open windows, furniture crashing, Belinda screaming. Charlie bit again, tearing into her hands as she tried to defend herself. Blood pooled quickly on the carpet as he continued his relentless assault. Belinda tried to crawl away, but Charlie dragged her back by her clothes. He hit her with his fists, then bit into her forearm, breaking the bone. Her screams brought neighbors running to the house. One man tried the door, but stopped when he looked through the window. Charlie was hunched over Belinda, his face and arms covered in blood. The neighbors backed away and called 911, their voices shaking as they described what was happening. Police arrived within minutes. Officers walking toward the front door heard the chimp screeching and Belinda crying. Through the glass, they saw Charlie attacking, tearing at her scalp and face. There were no cages, no barriers, no way to separate the animal from the victim. When Charlie turned toward the window and pounded against it with bloodied hands, officers decided they had to act. They fired multiple shots, the sound echoing through the quiet street. Charlie collapsed in the living room on the blood-stained carpet. Officers rushed inside and pulled Belinda out from under his body. She was barely conscious, her face destroyed and her hands mangled. Paramedics worked quickly, but the damage was severe. She was airlifted to a trauma center with critical facial injuries, severe trauma to both hands requiring amputation, and massive blood loss. Afterward, investigators documented the scene. Furniture was overturned, walls were splattered with blood, and Charlie lay where he had fallen. Belinda's phone was found on the kitchen counter, smeared with blood. The last call she tried to make to 911 was never completed. Neighbors gathered outside. The screams, they said, would stay with them forever. That's what the witnesses said after the attack, their voices still shaking. Belinda survived, but her life was irrevocably altered. Multiple surgeries couldn't undo the disfigurement, the need for constant care. The case became a national flashpoint, highlighting the inherent dangers of keeping exotic animals as pets. In Connecticut, lawmakers responded swiftly, enacting stricter laws and outright banning private chimpanzee ownership. The house where it happened eventually sold, the new owners forever aware of the dark history attached to the property. Then there was Daniel Ortiz. May 28, 2017. A Memorial Day barbecue on the outskirts of Austin, Texas, along a bend of the Colorado River. Families gathered at a privately rented picnic site, a quiet patch of grass bordered by live oaks and open water. Children played, adults unpacked food. But one guest had brought an animal most people only ever see behind glass. Daniel, a 36-year-old high school track coach, was known for his steadiness, the kind of guy who brought extra water and sunscreen. He'd stopped by the barbecue after a run, drawn by curiosity to the small crowd near the tables. He loved animals, volunteered at a shelter, knew how to calm anxious dogs. He kept his distance, respectful, staying behind a trash can. The chimp wore a harness, the owner handing out fruit. Daniel wanted a photo, just one clear shot to show his students. He moved forward, angling for a clean shot. The chimp shifted, pacing, sniffing, reaching. A thin musk mingled with the charcoal smoke. Adult male chimpanzees, I've learned, are simply not suited for public gatherings. Dominance, in their world, is enforced with sudden violence. Years of human handling can't erase those instincts. Crowds, unfamiliar faces, food competition, they can trigger those instincts in seconds. The site was just beyond Austin limits, beyond the reach of the city's ban on exotic animals. Few realized the handler lacked the proper permits. Someone even called out that it looked risky. Daniel nodded, adjusted his stance, waiting for the chimp to settle. The tension thickened. Children pulled back. The chimp snatched a strawberry, eyes fixed on moving hands and faces. The owner tugged the leash, which had slackened. Daniel stepped closer, maybe 2 feet, to avoid someone's shoulder in his frame. The chimp wheeled. For a beat, everything held still except the wind. The lunge was a blur of dark arms and bared teeth. The harness yanked tight, but not before the chimp's hand closed on Daniel's wrist. His phone flew, skidding across the dirt. The first bite tore into his forearm, skin and muscle ripped. Daniel stumbled backward, trying to pull free. The chimp's grip did not loosen. A second bite tore into the back of his hand. Screams erupted. The chimp dragged Daniel down, pinning him on his side. He tried to roll, but the chimp climbed his torso, hammering his shoulder with fists. The leash tangled, slackened again. The chimp shifted higher, seized Daniel's head with both hands, and bit into his cheek. Blood pooled in the grass, streaking the chimp's face. Attempts to intervene failed. A kick, a folding chair, nothing worked. The sounds were awful. Wet impacts of fists, ragged breathing, shrieks from the animal, grunts from Daniel with each bite. The owner managed to loop the leash under the chimp's chest, pulling it toward a picnic table leg, creating a brief barrier. The chimp released, then lunged again, tearing at Daniel's face and arms before finally losing strength. Daniel's movements weakened. He tried to lift an arm, but another bite broke a bone in his wrist with a sharp crack. Bystanders threw bottles, tried to shield him with a trash can lid. Nothing worked. Emergency calls went out, but the rural location delayed help. By the time deputies arrived, the shouting had stopped. The chimp sat trembling near the overturned table, the leash twisted tight. Daniel lay motionless on the trampled grass. The chimp was sedated and lifted into a transport cage. By dusk, only tire tracks and a few torn paper plates remained. The river kept moving, slow and steady, carrying away the sounds that had been. I've always been haunted by the story of what happened on September 14th, 2018. It was a day filled with sunlight in Los Angeles, California, but it ended in unimaginable violence. A trained chimpanzee, brought in for a simple animal demonstration, unleashed a brutal attack that would change a man's life forever. It serves as a stark reminder of the unpredictable power that lies within even the most familiar wild creatures. The morning sun cut across a small independent production studio, tucked between warehouses and sound stages. Crew members wheeled lighting equipment into place around a staged living room set. This was supposed to be simple. An animal demonstration for a daytime talk show, filmed by a local affiliate. Kevin Harris, a 41-year-old exotic animal trainer, had spent 2 decades building his career on patience and consistency. He taught wild species to tolerate human environments through gradual conditioning. The jobs were steady, if not glamorous. School assemblies, local commercials, small TV projects. This appearance with Mike, a 13-year-old chimp he'd worked with since infancy, was just another paycheck. At 125 pounds, Mike was fully mature, strong, intelligent, and, when stressed, unpredictable. Kevin often said the animal knew the rhythm of production life, that he could stay calm under noise and movement. But those familiar with chimps knew the truth. Adulthood changes everything. Males that once tolerated crowds often grew volatile once dominance instincts sharpened with age. The set itself was modest. A sofa, coffee table, and painted backdrop beneath hot studio lamps. Mike sat on a low stool beside Kevin, wearing only a light collar and leash. He shifted constantly, tugging at the strap and scanning the unfamiliar faces. Before cameras rolled, the animal safety coordinator suggested delaying the segment. Mike was showing stressed behaviors, pacing, baring teeth, tugging sharply on the lead. But the director insisted they proceed. The schedule was tight, and sunlight from the windows was already shifting. Kevin re-assured everyone it was fine, offering Mike small pieces of banana to settle him. The tension seemed to fade, at least for the moment. As recording began, the room brightened under the lamps. The host smiled for the opening shot, reading lines about wildlife awareness. Kevin guided Mike closer, cueing him to wave, a trick they'd rehearsed countless times. For a few seconds, everything worked. Then the boom microphone dipped low, casting a shadow that swept across Mike's face. His posture changed instantly, shoulders hunched, lips curled. A low pant hoot echoed off the walls. Kevin turned toward him, voice low, reaching out to calm him. That brief touch broke the balance. The chimp lunged sideways. The leash snapped tight as Kevin fell backward, the stool clattering across the floor. Mike's hands came down in rapid strikes, fists hammering Kevin's chest. The room filled with noise, shouts, hoots, the crash of equipment tipping over. A sound technician stumbled into a light stand. Someone yelled to cut the power. Kevin tried to shield his face, but Mike's jaws locked onto his arm just below the elbow. The bite tore muscle and tendons clean through. Blood sprayed across the carpet as Kevin twisted, trying to free himself. The chimp released and struck again. Another bite to the shoulder. Another blow with his fists. The host ran off set. Crew members screamed for security. One man swung a tripod to break the attack, but Mike dodged, gripping Kevin's shirt and dragging him toward the wall. The impact cracked one of the camera housings. The chimp's shrieks grew higher, rhythmic and mechanical. Each sound matched to a strike or bite. Kevin's movement slowed. His left arm hung limp. A second crew member threw a fire extinguisher. The spray clouded the air, coating the floor in white dust. Mike released for a moment, then turned toward the noise, baring teeth streaked with red. Security burst in, one man carrying another extinguisher, another holding a collapsible baton. The first blast of powder hit Mike square in the chest. He reared back. The second spray pushed him farther away from Kevin, who lay motionless on the floor. Animal control officers arrived within minutes, summoned by the studio's emergency call. They tranquilized Mike on sight, the dart striking his shoulder as he bared his teeth. He staggered briefly before collapsing beside the toppled couch, eyes fluttering. Kevin survived, but barely. Paramedics stabilized him before rushing him to a trauma center. Surgeons later documented dozens of puncture wounds, a shattered forearm, and severe facial injuries. He lost part of his arm and most of the muscle tissue on one side of his face. The production shut down indefinitely. The footage was never aired. In the aftermath, investigators cited lapses in protocol and disregard for the safety consultant's warning. For Kevin, the lesson came at an unbearable cost, one he would spend the rest of his life recovering from. And it brings me to another story, one that unfolded on October 9th, 2019, along the Kampala-Fortal Highway in western Uganda. I've always been drawn to the stories where ambition meets the raw power of nature, sometimes with tragic consequences. There's a chilling photograph I can't forget. A blurred image of a chimpanzee stepping from the vines, the last picture taken by a wildlife photographer named Martin. He died moments later. Martin was driven by the desire to capture unique images. He'd photographed gorillas and monkeys before, and this time he was in a roadside clearing, hoping to photograph chimpanzees against the backdrop of a mountain road. He had parked his car near a bend, slung his camera over his shoulder, and started walking along the road. A passing motorbike rider shouted something at him in the local language, gesturing towards the trees. But Martin just waved back. He seemed to think the real danger was from speeding trucks around blind corners, not the animals themselves. The highway cut sharply through green ridges, the vegetation pressing close. Traffic came in bursts, leaving long stretches of silence punctuated by the forest's background noise. On one side, a red dirt slope rose nearly 20 feet, covered in vines. On the other, trees leaned low over a drop into dense undergrowth. It was along these margins that chimpanzees sometimes appeared, able to climb across embankments or descend into the ditches that lined the road. Their habitat was shrinking, and the edge of the asphalt had become another boundary to patrol. I knew that when startled or challenged, these chimpanzees were known to respond with aggression. Rangers at the visitor center often warned tourists to stay inside their vehicles when driving the forest roads. Truck drivers had reported seeing chimps near bends, where fruit trees grew close to the highway. Locals avoided walking alone there, especially in the morning when the animals were most active. Martin had been told as much at his lodge the night before, but he dismissed it, reasoning that he had worked safely around gorillas under stricter conditions. Just a few minutes into his walk, he saw movement on the slope above. A large male chimpanzee emerged from the vines, pausing at the edge. Behind him, two smaller chimps lingered in the plants. Martin raised his camera, crouching low for a clear angle. A truck roared past, startling the animals. The younger chimps retreated into cover, but the male stood his ground, hooting sharply. Martin kept clicking, zooming in. He stepped forward into the lane, unaware that the chimp had begun to climb down towards him. The descent took only seconds. The chimp dropped onto the asphalt with a heavy thud, closing the gap on all fours. Martin lowered his camera just as the animal charged, dark arms swinging with sudden speed. The first impact knocked him backward into the gravel, his camera skidding across the pavement. The chimp seized his left arm and dragged him toward the edge of the road. Martin tried to brace himself, but the strength difference was overwhelming. The first bite clamped onto his forearm, tearing skin and muscle. A passing motorbike braked, the rider shouting as he watched. Martin screamed and kicked, but the chimp straddled his chest and struck his head with fists. Another bite tore into his shoulder. Blood pooled quickly on the gravel, running into the ditch. The younger chimps appeared briefly from the tree line, hooting and circling before retreating again. The male remained fixed on Martin, pulling at his clothes and biting again, this time at his ear and jaw. Witnesses tried to intervene. The motorbike rider threw stones, but the chimp barely flinched. A truck slowed, horn blaring, startling the animal just long enough for Martin to roll weakly onto his side. The chimp dragged him back and sank its teeth into his thigh, shaking violently. The sounds were raw. Martin's strained breathing, the chimp's screeches, the crunch of gravel as the struggle shifted back and forth. The assault lasted only a few minutes, though it felt far longer to the witnesses. Finally, another vehicle stopped, and locals rushed forward, shouting and waving sticks. The chimp released Martin and retreated toward the slope, disappearing into the vines with blood on its face and hands. Martin lay motionless on the roadside, his clothes torn and soaked. Drivers flagged down a passing truck, and he was lifted onto the flatbed using a blanket. With no ambulance nearby, locals tried to keep press on his wounds. As the truck sped toward Fortal, he lost consciousness within minutes. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, he had no pulse. Doctors at the hospital confirmed he was dead on arrival. His camera bag held memory cards with his last images: the forest edge, the red dirt slope, and that one blurred frame of the chimp stepping from the vines.